G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle, and today, well, we're going to talk about beast snaggers again, but because we had a few questions posed, namely in regards to Dominion and beast snaggers, and I want to talk about that. I also want to talk about why I spend so much time dwelling on what Games Workshop themselves do, especially with 40k, when I'm primarily a Horus Heresy player. Because I don't think people quite understand why I'm interested in what they do. Because it seems like I have zero investment in the franchise, which, to a degree, is true. So, to start with, let's talk about the differences between Dominion, which is the Age of Sigmar starter set, and the Beast Snaggers. Because, as people have pointed out, this is an example of Games Workshop overproduction and underselling. So, the first and biggest thing about these two boxes is the goal of the box. Dominion is designed to be an entry point to the entire game. Beast Snaggers, on the other hand, is a limited offer designed to offer access to a particular faction. The long-term goals of these two boxes are completely dissimilar. Dominion is designed to appeal to anyone interested in getting into the game, and is marketed as the perfect entry point and is designed to be stocked in every single store. Beast Snaggers, on the other hand, is not. They are designed to appeal to the demographic which likes that particular faction and that alone. Doesn't mean they don't like other stuff on top of that, but the whole intent of it is to sell those models to a group of people, not to every person. It isn't offering anything universally appealing, such as the system rules. Now, the amount of products which are like Beast Snaggers recently, and which fall into this niche, is increasingly and consistently going up. It is usually a boxed set offering new models, and the sales and marketing spin that coincides with the box is you can get all the models contained within at a later stage. What they don't say is when that later stage is. Sometimes it's a few weeks, sometimes it's a few months, and usually it's accompanied by a massive price increase. For example, if you look at the Chaos Space Marines, the Obliterators still haven't made their way to an individual boxed set, and we're pretty far down the line. So, you have to take these things as they come. So, this predatory tactic, and that's what it is, don't try and downplay it, it's designed to compel people to purchase. So why would I, a person who is devoted to the Horus Heresy, take such notice of 40k boxes and their marketing tactics? Well, I take notice simply because it affects me. Everything in Games Workshop is linked. Take the production of units. You can't create a new game system on top of the existing game systems without moving some resources towards that end. You cannot just move those resources over without taking them from somewhere else unless you expand your capacity. And it's not as simple as just hiring more staff or buying more machines. If you expand your capacity as a company, how much training do the staff need to take? How much input time is there into getting the machines up and running that your maintenance teams have to look into in making the dies fit the machines? Are the people who are running this new team for this new game the old hands or the new crew? Because if they are, the game is going to turn out very differently. If they're a mix of the two, will the delay in the schedule because one person can work really fast and knows what they're doing and one person's still adjusting to the new job, will that disrupt the quality or the schedule? Take a look at the Horus Heresy. Once Specialist Games was brought back, they took all the staff who were working on the Horus Heresy at Forge World and placed them all into working on games like Blood Bowl, Necromunda, Titanicus, and it meant that the Horus Heresy, it went unsupported, and deliberately so, because they took the resources and moved them elsewhere. Then you have a change in business tactics, which are obvious to even an outsider. For example, as soon as Games Workshop created 8th edition 40k, the Imperial Army units simply dried up. Why? Because they didn't fit the new business model, which is a narrow range of plastic kits with semi-posable miniatures and fixed loadouts. It's the polar opposite of the Forge World micro-detailing of sub-factions. So when I took a look at the Beast Snagger release, I do not and cannot compare it to something like Dominion, as they are polar opposite products. it also allows me to use some basic reasoning to rationalise the likely future scenarios. Now bear with me here as I'm going to go through some quick dot points and predictions for the Heresy and even Kill Team. So first off, Heresy. Heresy, if released in plastics, as I stated a couple of videos ago, can only have so many miniatures released at once. The criteria that determines this is that the resources cannot be pulled from too many other departments. Alongside this, it caters to a different niche, and so must prioritise accordingly. Therefore, there are two scenarios based on how Games Workshop operates, and they are A niche game system, whereby the product is aimed at the narrow window of customers. Like Titanicus, this would be an expensive box set offering a lot of miniatures but overall is low on substance. Or B, they aim for a wider appeal game system, which is also low on substance but promises big things around it. Now, depending on A or B, I can then extrapolate the following. If it's type A, we will get a narrow window of releases with barely enough to subsist on with the initial release, with people relying on Forge World still to flesh out their force. Again, think Titanicus or Aeronautica. If it's type B, however, you will see a larger initial release with more regular sub-releases, with very basic approach to the kits, which I will just call make it in plastic. This is what you might liken to, say, the Primaris release, an initial release with enough fleshing out to function solely as its own entity from Games Workshop without any Forge World input, but still a very narrow range nonetheless. Type A releases could be a 6-monthly release of about 3 kits like Necromunda or other specialist games. The goal being to bring out a book or a campaign and then fill the niche that that book aims at. And the Type B releases could be a 2 to 3 monthly release of 2 to 3 kits, which is basically double the output and designed to deliver semi-constant content relating to a ongoing campaign. Now obviously Type B is the more desirable, as that type falls into what I'll call the Snagga paradox, that the box is wildly popular, offering instant access, but then is in higher demand than GW will potentially supply. Note that I said supply, not anticipate. You see, it's cynical, but it's very possible that Games Workshop anticipates the demand and yet does nothing to remedy the issue, as they've already achieved financial viability and reached the short-term goal they've set themselves. What does that mean? Well, it means that if Games Workshop knows they're already going to make money off it, why go to the extra effort of producing enough boxes to satisfy everyone? It doesn't matter, they've already made their money and they move on to the next thing. Now, I've laid out a lot of assumptions here, but this is what I've noticed ever since the current management took over. There aren't any more Hobbit, Escape from Goblin Town limited edition boxes still available 6 years later, as they aren't falling into the trap of trying to supply enough copies. Instead of trying to make enough copies to justify making kits for everyone, they simply make enough copies to justify making the molds, and then they call it a day. The only time you get an oversupply of a product is when it's designed to hang around long term as its own thing. Think Dominion, which will probably be sold for the next 2 to 3 years. So where does this put, say, Kill Team? Well, look at the same patterns, things like Piety and Pain. Kill Team will likely end up being sold out in minutes on arrival. Now, unlike Snaggas, you may see a reissue of the game to be a shelf filler at the local stores, but I doubt enough sets will be supplied initially to make it the must-have game for everyone on launch. More likely the box will fall into this weird niche, where some people want it for Kill Team, as they predominantly play Kill Team, and they want the rules, and some people will buy it for the love of building it and painting it, and others will buy it because they now have grand dreams of making a Deathcore of Krieg Force and think the best way to achieve that goal is by buying the Kill Team set in bulk instead of waiting for the individual releases. On top of all of this, we have a weird rules situation, where some things that really shouldn't be are being paywalled behind the initial release content. Take for example the Snaggas. The faction is currently locked away behind the box set, unable to be bought and played otherwise, instead of doing a wider release. where they put up a start collecting box alongside the limited box, and then offering either better value or special models in the limited box to make it a more lucrative buy. Instead, the box is lucrative as it's the only entry point into the faction. That's slimy as hell. Smart, but slimy as a business move and engenders more bad will than good. So why do I talk so much about what Games Workshop does with their game systems when I now have very little investment into any of them? Well, because like I've demonstrated, it informs my decision making and how I guide you, the customer. You know as well as I do by now the cycle. You get a new release. It has some static preview on Warhammer Twitch. The next day, a picture of the miniatures from one angle. This is then built up over 3 weeks or so with new articles on the units, with first more units shown, then more angles of the existing units, then a piece on their background and the themes. Many articles. Then the first kit drops, and then over the next few weeks, more releases occur, and then the faction vanishes from Warhammer community, so that the next flavour of the month can begin its hype cycle. After all, just ask yourself, since 9th edition 40k came out, how many articles have you seen on the releases since then on Necron Tactica? What about Age of Sigmar, Sons of Bahamut, for example? Remember those 3 giants they released? What about articles in Fabius Bile? How are they coming along? Exactly. They've been, they're gone, there is only time for the next unit. So when I look at Games Workshop, I look at these tactics. Call it negative, call it cynical, whatever. Being cynical is what stops you freely giving out your bank details to people. It's not a bad thing. I look at and I predict things, and I'm far more often right than wrong when it comes to these release cycles, about how many kits and what strategy they're using. Now the only additional trick, which I'll comment on, and what I've seen lately, is what I'll call the beta release. In a video game, they have a thing called a beta or a pre-alpha version. This is where a lot of the kinks are worked out. They release a version of the game and people trial it. And it's usually, the graphics aren't quite right, there's glitches and bugs, and based on the feedback they get, they're supposed to fix all of this. That's the idea. Well, unfortunately, this is then just usually sold on to the customer, and the content in these games is very thin on the ground. In 6 months' time, however, the first DLC or downloadable content drops, and you have a dynamic shift in the game. Well, we see this in miniatures as well, and we've seen it now with the Sisters of Battle and the Lumineth Realm Lords, who have both had initial releases, and then they get a second release, which negated much of the initial release, superseding things like codexes or even some units by replacing them with better alternatives. Now, this is also pretty scummy, and I wouldn't care, nor would most people, if you had the rules included in the initial release, and then they included these units later on down the line with actual models. Instead, what you get, though, is you get the release of an initial book that if the company works 2 years ahead, they know is sure to be replaced within months, and it's not a great thing. But as it's a relatively new phenomenon, I don't feel too confident predicting it happening to more ranges. So, there you go. That's my thought patterns when it comes to why I give a damn what Games Workshop mainstream does with their product lines. Because what they do sets the tone for what happens to the system I do care about. And you can see these recurring patterns over a period of time, whether it's slow releases or bad releases or releases where it's so constrained by having so little content that you either can't get a hold of it or you do, but that's it, you're stuck with the one thing for months on end. Whether it's something like Aeronautica, where, hey, there's a lot of factions who aren't represented in Aeronautica yet. What do you do then? You're just going to wait years to get into the game until your faction comes along? It sucks. So, this is why I predict things. This is why I do videos on this content. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.